Dear heroes of Dracania, we welcome you to the next episode in the Dev Diaries series. Today, we are interviewing Jeff Broadbent, global award-winning composer and sound designer for video games, film, and television. Jeff is known for composing numerous video game scores, including Tom Clancy's End War Online and PlanetSide 2, and he has been working with Drakensang Online for a while as well. In particular, you can hear Jeff's work in the amazing soundtrack for the new continent of Lor'Tac, a soundtrack that has given him a gold medal in the latest Global Music Awards. We would like to thank Jeff for dedicating us a little bit of his time and answer some of our questions. Okay, Jeff, so let's start with some biographical detail about you, shall we? Can you tell us briefly what your story is? We know that you make video game and media scores for a living, so can you tell us how did you start following that path or that passion of yours, and how long have you been in the industry?
So my whole life I've enjoyed music. Ever since I was young, I had an initial desire to study music and pursue it. I started playing piano at the age of 8. And shortly thereafter, saxophone. I played in high school bands, jazz bands. I had actually a jazz improvisation teacher when I was a teenager that got me interested in composing because I saw the link between composing and improvising. And at that point, I, of course, always loved, video games and film scores. I grew up playing the Final Fantasy games with all the great music themes in them. So I basically put 2 and 2 together and knew that I loved music, knew that I loved video games, and so I knew it would be a great fit. When I was in college, I studied music composition. I have a master's degree in music composition, and I also attended UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, to study film scoring and video game scoring. And those things really solidified my interest in the industry. I've been working in the video game industry since 2009. I've worked for many different companies, of course, Big Point and Ubisoft, Activision, Warner Brothers, and I love what I do and it's great to work in it.
Your work with Drakensang Online did not start with Rise of Balor, but we can find samples of your work already in the game prior to the content expansion, such as the lovely Kinsil theme. How did you get involved with Drakensang Online?
So I got involved with composing music for Drakensang Online through Andy Gibson, the audio director. I had been in touch with Andy several months prior. We had emailed one another back and forth, and I was always, staying in touch with him. And the time came when they needed some additional music for the game. At first, it was a new main theme and also some themes for some of the peaceful towns in the game. So that was the first instance in which I started composing music for Drakensang. Earlier this year, they had a large expansion, the Rise of Balor expansion, and that was a bunch of new maps and all new music. We did interactive music for this latest expansion, so that's been my latest venture into composing music for the game.
And how do you normally approach the initial ideas stage? Where do your ideas generally come from?
Before I start composing for a project, there's an initial phase where I do a lot of brainstorming and I really try to understand the creative direction of the game. Usually what happens for video games is they'll send me cutscenes, gameplay video, and concept art. And I'll look at all these visual elements and in my mind I'll start forming an idea of how to approach the music score sonically, what instruments to use. That's usually one of the first things I address is what instruments to use. I like to start with this approach of instrument choice because it allows me to pick instruments that best suit the game world and really get the instrumental palette and colors correct. After that, I'll usually start composing some of the main themes first because the main themes can serve as the building blocks for the rest of the score. Of course, in addition to viewing all the visual material, I always have some in-depth discussions with the audio team and sometimes the producers in which they're telling me their thoughts for how the music might be and how we might best achieve that.
And the instrumentation and arranging for the interactive music? Because being a video game composer means that you need to create non-linear compositions that shift according to players' actions, right? So how do you normally prepare for that?
In video games, the music is interactive, which means the music changes and shifts based on what the player is doing in the game. It's different from a film, of course. In a film, the music is linear, but in a video game, depending on if you're exploring or in a dangerous region or fighting enemies, the music needs to change according to that. So in video games, we use layered music. There's a three-tier layer approach, which we used for Drakensang. There's an exploration layer, which is where you're just exploring, not yet engaging enemies. There's a tension layer for minor combat situations and a full combat layer for the full combat situations. Usually when I compose these interactive layers, I'll either start with the lowest intensity layer, which would be the exploration layer, or the highest intensity layer, the full combat layer. Once I finish composing that first layer, then to create the other layers, I'll add and subtract instruments, adjust the mix, adjust the volume of different instruments, and I'll listen to how the layers transition between one another so I get a feel of how it'll actually work in game, because you want the layers to also transition seamlessly between one another.
Rise of Balor takes the heroes of Drakenia in an exploratory journey towards the heart of the world, which is situated in a remote continent called Lor'Tac. From the apparent stillness of the Dwarven expedition camp, which is the first beach map, to the later jungle and temple maps, the journey gets darker and darker with each step that the players take. We think that you have captured amazingly well that exploration theme, full of mysteries and danger. Each of the tracks seems to escalate in intensity until the final battle with the end boss, Balor, which is pretty epic, let me tell you. So how did you undertake the pre-creation process for Rise of Balor, and how did it develop?
For composing the music for the Rise of Balor expansion, I actually composed the music in the order in which the player encounters it, which means I first started with the first region of the expansion, which is where you land on the beach, you're approaching the region through the shore, and for this music I set the initial tone of a dark, mysterious, tribal nature, which really sets the tone for the journey ahead. Later I composed music for the various regions you progress through the jungles and gradually entering the various temples, the temple of ice, water, fire, etc., and finally resulting in the climactic battle with Balor. I found that because I was able to compose music in this order in which the players experience it, I could build from one music track to the next and kind of have a narrative sequence through the music, so that the score overall feels connected, but also has a sense of progression to it.
Did you have any help from concept art or any other source of information within the team prior to the composition of the soundtrack? I'm asking this because in your temple scores, the ones you did for the temples, for instance, the music blends perfectly with the atmosphere and the mobs that dwell there.
Yes, the concept art and visuals that I was given was definitely a big help in getting inspiration from the music. As I mentioned before, one of the things that I do is I really try to see the sonic instruments and colors that I'll use when I'm viewing the visual material. That was particularly helpful with Drakensang and in the temples in particular, because I could see some visual representations of some of the creatures in the temples and some of the regions, and based on that I could select the best instrument choice that would support that. Some examples of that is in the Temple of Ice, we use a lot of glistening harps and glass percussion, bells, some light synths, things that give a real glassy, icy feel. To contrast, for the Temple of Fire, we have some really intense brass, big percussion, timpanis. Also used some male choir for that temple that can give the aggressive, powerful, warlike feel of fire. And for the Temple of Death, death it's such a dark subject, so we used some mangled, distorted synthesizers, some dissonant choir effects and chants, various orchestral string effects, things that would really put the player on edge and give the dissonant, biting quality to the music.
Another influence that seems to pervade across Rise of Balor, at least in the game lore, is that one of Mesoamerican and Polynesian cultures. Did you follow that concrete pattern? And if so, how did you integrate it in your original idea?
When composing the music, I definitely did want a primitive and tribal element to be part of the music. I wasn't necessarily thinking in terms of any specific island culture, but I knew that I wanted some general, tribal, primitive, exotic elements in the score. To do that, I used a lot of tribal percussion, rain sticks, small hand drums, bowed metals, instruments that could be found in a primitive landscape. Another interesting thing is that we have some chants in the score, like some tribal chants. I actually had a fun time because I recorded those myself. I thought of various syllables and consonants, not actual words, that could give some bite and some aggression to the music, and I would lay those over rhythmically over the music so that they could be used in combat situations or sometimes in moments when the music is setting the tension up. Also, a lot of wind instruments are used, world wind instruments like various flutes, drones and other things, and these help really capture the tribal nature and set the tone for the music.
In retrospective, what have been the highlights of getting involved with Drakensang Online?
Some of the highlights in composing the music for Drakensang Online are the great variety of music that I've been able to compose for the game. There's really a big spectrum. Of course, there was the main theme that I composed that has, epic orchestra, thematic elements and motifs so that it's recognizable. And prior to Rise of Balor, I also wrote some music for some of the peaceful towns in the game, and this was great because I could have some calm atmospheres, some mysterious tones in the music, something that would, set less of a combat feel, more of a peaceful tone. And then for the Rise of Balor expansion, we could take the orchestral elements we previously used and mesh them with this tribal primitive music that really set the tone for this expansion. One of my favorite parts of the Rise of Balor music was the temple music. Each temple is distinct and different and kind of has its own theme, so the music would take on a different approach for each of the temples. I thought that was really a lot of fun. And of course, I really like composing combat music, and the final battle with Balor has, very epic and intense strings and brass, pounding percussion. It just takes the music to a really high intensity level for that final battle.
I would like to know now which one is the score that you feel most proud of, the one that strikes you as your best creation, one reason or the other.
I don't know if I really have a favorite score that I've worked on. Every score is unique, and I really enjoy composing, so every project that I'm working on I love to work on, but a couple do stand out. One is the score for I Am Alive, which was a Ubisoft game that I scored. I really enjoyed scoring that game because the scoring process was really unique. We didn't use any orchestra instruments for the most part, just a tiny bit of strings. And really it was based on ambient soundscapes to set the tone for an apocalyptic scene, and a lot of sound design based percussion, so that as you're listening to the score you can't really identify what the exact instrument is that's being used, but it really fits the scene. Like there were some moments where you're in dangerous underground territory exploring the subways, and there's these synth elements that sound kind of like a train approaching, or the creaking of the metal rails, things like that. Also in I Am Alive, I was able to write some more dramatic and emotional music for moments in the game where the player is searching for his family, protecting a young girl he finds, and so on, which is more rare for video games to have that kind of element in it, so I enjoyed that a lot. Of course, another one of my recent favorites is the music for Drakensang Online. I would say that's because we had such a great variety of music we could compose, and in particular, as I mentioned, the temples, the different nature element for each temple and how to reflect that in the music. That was an interesting composing approach that I really enjoyed.
And if we are allowed to ask, what current projects are you working on?
I am working on multiple projects now. I'm always very busy as a composer. A couple I can talk about. One of them is a game called Terraria Otherworld. It's kind of a sequel, but also a spin-off from the first Terraria game, the very popular sandbox open world game developed by Logic. So in this game, we're creating all new music for the new game. It's not out yet, but it should be out in the near future. And it's just been a blast working on that. I love the original Terraria game. I've loved playing it. It's great to work on a game like that, which is an indie game, but a very popular and widespread game. Another game that I'm currently composing some music on is a Ubisoft game called Settlers Kingdoms of Antaria. Last year I composed music for this game, and I'm currently composing some additional music for it. So it'll be great to see that when that game releases. I'm also working on a couple scores for 2 other additional video games, which are as of yet undisclosed. And in my spare time, working on music for an upcoming trailer music album.
So once again, thanks a lot for answering these questions, Jeff. We really appreciate it, and we are sure our players do the same. We would like to take the opportunity to congratulate you for that golden medal in the Global Music Awards and wish you all the best in your next composing enterprises, and hopefully see you soon in Drakensang Online. And guys, if you liked what you saw, don't forget to check on Jeff's Rise of Balor soundtrack in our YouTube and SoundCloud channels. You can also hear samples of Jeff's work on his personal website, so don't forget to check that one out. You will find all the links in the description down below. See you in the next episode.